It pays to know the classics. This is a postscript to Lei Tingji's very nice strategic win in the World Championship match. Didn't do much good in the end, but still, this game 5, was excellent. Quick recap. I don't want to take you through the whole thing again, but Lei has just played the pawn to a4, and this gives white some control over b5, which means that it's easier to operate on c4. And notice this structure. You can see there's a massive gap on d5 as well. So these are critical squares. It's not the same for white because that pawn on c3 covers these squares. And let's just run a few moves on just to remind you of what happened. So Lei managed to get control over c4, and then the knight came in. Now this was removed, and then the bishop came onto this diagonal. This was to remove this knight, which might actually hop into d4. So that knight was removed, and then Lei occupied this d5 square, and it's very difficult to shake white's control over these c4 and d5 squares, and eventually Lei turned towards the king side and managed to break things open. But you can see by this stage, the control over c4 and d5 is absolutely crucial. And let's just go right back just to remind ourselves, it all started with this move a4. And that begins the conquest of these squares. Now, we're going to look at some classics that, well, they revolve around a similar pawn structure. So I want to briefly look at some games by Fischer, Botvinnik and Geller. Let's start with a game by Yefim Geller. So Geller was legendary Soviet chess player, won the Soviet Championship, well, I can't remember on how many occasions, but one of the strongest players in the world in the 1950s and 1960s. Now, he developed strategies around this bishop e2 against the Najdorf, and, well, he was later on a trainer for Anatoly Karpov, and, well, he taught Karpov a lot about these systems. So this game was played in 1961. Geller against Bertok, played in Belgrade. Here Black makes a strategic mistake. It's a typical Najdorf position, but Black really ought to be trying to achieve the break d5. But Bertok plays knight c5, mistake. Now, look at that structure again. These two pawns here. Weakness on d5. I know it's covered at the moment, but that c4 square is also available. And very important to have that pawn on a4 so that b5 doesn't happen. Now watch. Okay, queen f2. The queen was attacked. And Bertok is obviously thinking, well, if I exchange lots of pieces, then surely that'll bring me closer to a draw. Okay, watch how Geller plays this. This is a strategic masterpiece. It's fantastic. So first of all, bishop c4. We saw how important this diagonal was in the Lei against Zhu game. Bishop on c4 looks down at f7 and also starts to get control over d5. Bishop e7, right? Next move, very important. Queen e2, very nice. So it attacks this pawn. Black doesn't really want to play a5 because that'll weaken the b5 square. It might actually be the best response, but it's not beautiful. Instead, Bertok keeps control over b5, but now the queen and bishop are tied to defending that pawn. Okay, and watch how carefully Geller plays this. Just little by little, he steps forward. Queen d3, so claims control over the open file. h6, and now, does he rush things? No, Geller just brings his king into the middle. That's very nice. It might be this queen goes on an adventure. And it might be useful for the king to cover these squares. It might be he's thinking of pushing on the king side, and you never know. It might be good to have the king over the other side of the board. But there's no harm in just letting black sweat here, and black can't do anything. Now, nice maneuver, bishop f2. Black is still completely passive. Bishop g3, aha. Attacks this one, and that's rather awkward to defend. The knight has to drop back. The queen can't move because this will be taken. So knight d7. Ah, very nice. So now that the knight has disappeared, it was defending d5. Now the knight hops in to the dream square. This terrible weakness on d5, and that knight is an absolute monster. Bishop g5 played. Okay, the bishop gets a little bit active. Bishop f2. Bishop goes back to d8. Again, there's no rush. Bishop d8. Now, this knight is on a great square, but it finds an even better one coming into f5. If g6, then queen b3. There's a nice switch. Again, that diagonal is incredibly important. And that is very hard to defend. That's just winning for white. So bishop c7, that means the queen can come here. Knight f5, that's a beautiful square. You can see the pawn can't advance because the h-pawn drops. Bishop b8. And bishop h4, this is provoking more weaknesses. Of course, it's possible to block out the bishop. But the bishop just comes back, and then h6 is weak. So queen c6. Bishop d5. I mean, black is just getting pushed all over the place. Now, I think there are many ways for white to play here, but Geller finds a destructive move. Bishop takes pawn. Action on the diagonal again. So if king takes, then queen check. And knight e7, and this is going to lead to disaster. Very soon, of course, the knight is forking king and queen. So after bishop takes, g5 and queen c4. If pawn takes bishop, the queen invades. That's winning. And knight f6, bishop drops back. So white has won a pawn, but more than that, black's king is now fatally exposed. And here's a nice move, a5, just breaking up these pawns, so this one is undermined. It's not getting better for black. So that's now 2 pawns, and that's 3 pawns. And here Bert resigned. Absolute positional masterpiece. Starting with that move bishop c4. And remember this structure with this big gap in the middle on d5. Beautiful play from Geller. He didn't rush it. Okay, now let's have a look at Botvinnik. So this is a game Botvinnik against Szilágyi from Amsterdam 1966. So sort of later on in Botvinnik's career. Very early on, black gives up this bishop, which is playable. But watch what happens, because this bishop doesn't have an opponent, and black wasn't really careful enough. I'm just going to zip through these next moves. White's gaining some nice space. And now decides, okay, now is the time to break. Well, I think black already has a difficult position, but after c5, well, watch this structure with that weakness on d5. Botvinnik plays, of course, he doesn't take, which would expose this c-pawn. He pushes on. And that means, well, look at that bishop. It's dead. And look at these beautiful squares. Here, I think black's only response is to play c4, just to give up a pawn. And just play a pawn down. But at least this bishop is working, and there's a square, and you never know, the rook might be able to get some pressure here. Of course, white is better, but I think that's black's only move. Instead, Szilágyi played knight e8. And after this, well, once again, we can see white has excellent control over c4. And Botvinnik never lets this grip go. the bishop g5 is a very nice move, actually. So if queen takes, then knight takes knight, and the knight is in. I dare say something nasty is going to happen on f7. But it's very nice to provoke this move, because now there are fatal weaknesses. Whoops, that's misfired. On that diagonal. And watch what happens. Now you can see that when black gave up that light squared bishop, probably wasn't thinking about this position. It would be nice if you could put a bishop on e6, but no. That bishop on c4 just rules the diagonal. I'm going to zip through this one very quickly. a6 is nice, because that means that this pawn is a weakness when white breaks through. And here Botvinnik just shifted that queen to c4, as Lei did actually. And Lei's queen was excellent on c4. This one is just deadly. Queen invades. I mean, Botvinnik's play is actually terribly simple, and now this pawn will help to create a mating net. So the queen wants to come here, pawn on h5, bishop f7 to g6, and it's gone. So you can see that's the threat. And, well, Solagi just, well, there's nothing to do actually. And here, well, that's the end of the game. And white just plays bishop f7 and bishop g6 mate. So just to recap, just watch this position, c4 and d5. Okay, one last game. Let's have a look at a game by Fischer. Now, I've actually shown this game before on the channel. So this is Fischer against Ibrahimoglu, USA against Turkey from the Siegen Olympiad in 1970. And it's another strategic masterpiece from Fischer. Look, he's got the two bishops. In particular, that light squared bishop doesn't have an opponent. So although it's not doing much at the moment, just watch. It has a very bright future. It's already a difficult position for black. If you don't play e5, then there's even the possibility to advance later with f4 and e5. But white has a very nice initiative on the queen side. e5. Black wanted security, but watch those squares again. It's very similar. And what's Fischer's next move? Now, time for me to have a slow tea. Time for you to have a think. So what would you play here with white? There are quite a few attractive moves in this position. But the way Fischer played it, well, he played with his usual strategic clarity. Cheers, folks. Knight d2. You can see that this knight has no future on b3. It's not going anywhere. This is white's worst piece. However, if we redeploy it here, or maybe b1, as in the game, then black is going to struggle. There's not a lot going on in the position. There are no real tactics. So, you know, why not spin round and just improve the position of the knight? So this knight is coming to d6, well, as Siladi did, but it doesn't really help. Fischer just took here. Oh, you can also play knight c4 in this position, but Fischer went knight b1. And the knight has options here, so black defended with knight c7. And actually, Fischer just played knight b5, incredibly simple move. And after the exchange, queen came to b5. So, well, that knight exchange, the pity to exchange off that knight, it would have been nice to go into d5, but black had it covered. But after that knight exchange, it just means that this queen can operate on the light squares very easily. And, well, I won't go through the whole game. I'll give the link to the video because as I said, I've looked at this before. But just to show you this transfer of the bishop onto these light squares, is just decisive. Black just doesn't have a defense. And Fischer played like this, and well, he won the game absolutely beautifully. Again, I would direct you to that video. Oh heck, come on, we're here already. We may as well go through to the end of the game because it's such a classy performance. So having tied Black down on the queen side, so Fischer switches back the queen. This is beautiful. And then plays queen d2. In fact, bishop h6 check is winning immediately. It's a beautiful idea. But I can't imagine Fischer was in calculating mode. He just played queen d2, a simple move. Okay, let me just show you bishop h6. This is quite good fun. After this, you can play rook g8, stopping the king coming back. And this is absolutely fatal. Basically, there's no defense to this attack. Just show you this very quickly. Bishop e7, trying to block here. h4, queen d2, and mate. I mean, there are other ways as well, but it's very attractive. Anyway, yeah, like I said, Fischer he's winning strategically. He wasn't even bothering to calculate. And watch just how he finished off. So it's interesting. This bishop sort of vacates these dart squares, and now this bishop moves in. But Black is still completely tied up. And it's to do with the weakness of these squares, really. Exchange of rooks doesn't make any difference because now look at these bishops. Absolutely beautiful. And Fischer won like this. There we go. Invading. Bishop e8. Attacking this one. And a little tactic to win a pawn. And this one's dropping. This one's dropping. This one's dropping. It's over. And Fischer's opponent, Ibrahimoglu, resigned the game. So, pays to know the classics. Let's look at this one again. Look at these pawns. Look at this terrible weakness here. And on c4. And here on b5 as well. Let's just look back at Botvinnik. So we'll look at this position. Again. White takes control over these squares and this diagonal. Very, very important. And finally, let's go back to Geller, who took control over this diagonal. In fact, the fatal blow came on f7. And let's finally go all the way back to Lei against Zhu Wenjun. And this position, and how Lei took control over these squares, arriving at this position with a complete bind, and she managed to turn to the king side. They're all related, and it really does pay to know your classics. Thanks for watching.